The Wordville Kids.
Wow! Look, Ben, this is a lion! Lion! Roar! Roar! Look, Ben, this is a dog! Dog! Woof! 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 Look, Ben, this is a cow! Cow! Moo! Moo! Look, Ben, this is a monkey! Monkey! Look, Ben, this is a dolphin! Dolphin! Click! Click! Look, Ben, this is a zebra! Zebra! Neigh! 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 Look, Ben, this is a penguin! Penguin! Honk! Honk! Look, Ben, this is a frog! Frog! Ribbit! Ribbit! Look, Ben, this is a bee! Bee! Buzz! Buzz! Look, Ben, this is a rabbit! Rabbit! Sniff, sniff! Sniff, sniff! Look, Ben, this is a horse! Horse! Neigh! Neigh! Look, Ben, this is a bear! Bear! Growl! Growl! Look, Ben, this is a crocodile! Crocodile! Snap! Snap! Look, Ben, this is a fox! Fox! Yippee! Yippee! Look, Ben, this is an owl! Owl! Hoot! Hoot! Look, Ben, this is a butterfly! Butterfly! Flutter! Flutter!
Look, Ben, this is a hippopotamus. Hippopotamus. Grunt. Grunt. Look, Ben, this is a kangaroo. Kangaroo. Boing. Boing. Look, Ben, this is a squirrel. Squirrel. Chatter. Chatter. Look, Ben, this is a peacock. Peacock. Scream! Scream! Look, Ben, this is a snake. Snake. Hiss, hiss. Look, Ben, this is a gorilla. Gorilla. Thump, 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 thump. Look, Ben, this is a pig. Pig. Oink, oink. Look, Ben, this is a walrus. Walrus. Groan, groan. Look, Ben, this is a raccoon. Raccoon. Chitter, chitter. Look, Ben, this is a cheetah. Cheetah. Chirp, chirp. Look, Ben, this is a koala. Koala. Munch, 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 munch. Look, Ben, this is a hyena. Hyena. Laugh, laugh. Look, Ben, this is a bat. Bat. Screech, screech. Look,
is a vulture. Vulture. Hiss, hiss. Look, Ben, this is an ostrich. Ostrich. Hiss, hiss. Look, Ben, this is a panda. Panda. Munch, 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 munch. Look, Ben, this is a flamingo. Flamingo. Honk, honk.
Look, Ben, this is an anteater. Anteater. Slurp, slurp. Look, Ben, this is a warthog. Warthog. Grunt, grunt. Look, Ben, this is a meerkat. Meerkat. Bark, bark. Look, Ben, this is a beaver. Beaver. Gnaw, gnaw, gnaw. Look, Ben, this is an armadillo. Armadillo. Grunt, grunt. Look, Ben, this is an okapi. Okapi. Cough, cough. Look, Ben, this is a starfish. Starfish. Swish, swish. Look, Ben, this is a jellyfish. Jellyfish. Bob, 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 bob. Look, Ben, this is a bongo. Bongo. Bleat, bleat. Look, Ben, this is a gopher. Gopher. Squeak, squeak. Look, Ben, this is a woodpecker. Woodpecker. Tap, 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 tap. Look, Ben, this is an impala. Impala. Bark, bark. Look, Ben, this is a serval. Serval. Hiss, hiss. Look, Ben, this is a caiman. Caiman. Hiss, hiss. Look, Ben, this is a wombat. Wombat. Grunt, grunt. Look, Ben, this is a quoll. Quoll. Hiss, hiss. Look, Ben, this is a narwhal. Narwhal. Whistle, whistle.
Like it, Ben? We've learned so much today. Help me think. What will we discover next?
The Wordville Kids.